Okay, this is going viral, and here's Alex Stavropoulos.
Hi, welcome to everyone. It's March 22nd, 2022, and this is the March 22nd show for Going Viral. I'm your host, Alex Stavropoulos. We also have here Ken Aaron, Victor Wallis, and Dennis Goldstein. Mike Jankowitz may join us later this evening. So let's begin a little bit with some of the news today. So let me go through some of the headlines at the New York Times today. The big one, is, quote, Russia's combat forces have shrunk, Pentagon says. Again, how much we want to give to that. But again, they're saying, well, obviously they've taken some losses. Ukrainians have too. So, whether they're right, who the hell knows, given the amount of, information and disinformation that's out there. Also should be noted, another, the French energy company Total is saying that it's going to stop buying oil from Russia, but only by the end of the year. So, we'll see about that. Of course, and do you have any? You said you didn't have any clips, Ken, but do you have anything on the Supreme Court hearings? Because obviously that's happening with Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, who's a new Democrat pick to replace Justice Breyer on the Supreme Court. And I think actually it's. I think it's live. Oh, well, okay, so at some point, the Times has, I think, a live feed. So at some point, we can just play a little bit of that. It looks like, here, actually, or Ken, you want to do it now? Why not?
Whether there's been reliance on the decision that is being revisited, whether the decision is workable or unworkable, the one that they're looking at. Whether the facts are new facts have come to light, or the facts have the circumstances are such that there's now a new understanding of the prior facts, and whether the case law.
I was about to say that. I think it's Justice Thomas was a little sick recently.
And in fact, those are the factors that the Supreme Court listed 3 years ago in Janus.
Biden may get a chance to appoint 2 justices.
Those are the factors. I don't have the Janus opinion in front of me, but those are the factors that the court uses when it determines.
Janus overruled, I think, Senator Rono.
All right, Senator Kennedy.
Alex, let's listen to them.
Yes.
Dealing with whether labor unions can require non-members to pay dues. Remember that case?
Yes.
Is the age of the case, a factor in whether the Supreme Court will overrule a precedent?
I think age relates to the reliance factor. I think the longer an opinion has been in effect, the court has considered that to be relevant to its determination of reliance.
But sometimes the court looks at it not just in terms of reliance, they look at it from the other side of the age issue, and that is that maybe facts and circumstances and science have changed. Do they not?
I believe that is part of the change circumstances factor.
So the Supreme Court is more likely to overturn a case, which would not be that extraordinary, if the precedent were 49 years old as opposed to 4.9 years old.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
I'm just
well. You said that the older the case is, one could make an argument that the reliance interest would be great. But you also said, I think, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but the older the case is, the more facts and circumstances and science could have changed. So that would argue in favor of overruling it because of a change of circumstances. Did I get?
It might. These are all different circumstances that the court could consider under this multi-factor test.
Okay, but all things being equal, let's say decision's 49 years old versus 3 years old, like Janice. The older decision is more likely to be overturned, you think, based on your experience?
Oh, I don't know that I could make that prediction. I'm just saying that one of the factors, the reliance factor, the age of the opinion and how long people have been relying on it,
Yes, ma'am.
can be relevant to, it is one of the factors that the court considers.
Right. Okay. Let me jump gears here. I took some notes. You talked earlier about how you decide cases. I'm going to kind of summarize this. You said you clear your mind of any bias. You read everything. You read the briefs and the record, and then you apply the law. That's your methodology. You said you're not an activist judge. You said, am I right?
Yes,
You said judges are not politicians,
that is true.
and judges should stay in their lane.
Yes, sir.
Tell me again what you mean by stay in your lane.
What I mean is that in our system of government, under the Constitution, we have a separation of powers, and each branch has their own sphere of responsibility. To say stay in your lane is the shorthand that I'm using for indicating that judges should not be policymakers, that those responsibilities are left to the elected branches, and that judges are to interpret the law, not make the law. And I use it to refer to the part of my methodology that is mindful of the constraints on judicial authority.
Okay. Well put. So let me ask you. We can go to the Constitution, let's say the Bill of Rights, to narrow the discussion, and read about our explicit rights. Religious freedom, our right not to be unreasonably searched or seized, freedom of speech, they're right there. That's why they call them explicit. But the court has ruled we have a bunch of unenumerated rights. Am I correct?
The court has determined there are certain personal rights related to individual autonomy that are implicit in the concept of ordered liberty or deeply rooted in our nation's history or tradition.
But they're unenumerated.
Yes.
Okay. Should these unenumerated rights that only Supreme Court justices can see, should they be decided by the people through their elected representatives or by the unelected federal judiciary?
Well, Senator, the Supreme Court has interpreted the 14th Amendment to have a substantive component, and I'm not in a position to critique the court in terms of its precedents. That is the precedent of the Supreme Court.
Right, right. Well, let me ask you this: what is a fundamental right?
The court has interpreted the 14th Amendment's due process clause to include a substantive component and not just a procedural component, meaning the 14th Amendment guarantees due process, and the court has interpreted it to mean that with respect to certain rights, individual rights concerning intimacy, certain things like the right to contraception, the right to child rearing. There was a case of the Supreme Court that talked about making decisions for children in terms of visitation with respect to conflicts with grandparents, marriage.
Right. I'm with you.
These sorts of rights, the court has found, are implicit in ordered liberty, as I said, or deeply rooted in our nation's history and tradition.
The right to assisted suicide, is that one of those enumerated or unenumerated rights?
I believe the court found that it was not.
Which body do you think is better able to make that decision, the Congress or the federal judiciary?
Well, Senator, the Supreme Court has interpreted the Constitution, and the Supreme Court has the authority under our constitutional system to interpret the law.
Right.
And they've made the determination that the Constitution includes those unenumerated rights.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Judge. Maybe a better example, it's a very hot topic today. The right of a transgender woman to compete in women's sports. Do you think Congress, the people ought to get to decide that through Congress, or the judge can just find it as an unenumerated right, a penumbra of the Constitution?
Well, Senator, that the topic that you raised is something that is, as you say, a hot topic today, and could certainly be litigated. So I'm not in a position to say more about whether or not it's actually one of the unenumerated rights.
Well, I don't want to ask you how you'd rule, but would you have any problem saying, okay, if that case that is litigated, saying this is a political question? Whoa, stop! I'm staying in my lane. Congress needs to decide this case. The people need to decide that through their elected representatives.
Well,
would that be appropriate?
Well, respectfully, Senator, that is a decision. In other words, you say, I'm not asking you to decide it, but in every case, the determination about whether or not something is a political question or whether or not the court has or has not jurisdiction is an issue for judges, and so I'm not able to speak to it.
Okay. All right. Well, here's the thing about the fundamental rights. That's why I asked you about the definition of them. These are unenumerated rights now. I'm not talking about right to free speech and freedom of religion. The court has said repeatedly that there is no test for a unenumerated fundamental right, that the determination has not been reduced to a formula. Am I right?
Well, they've given those standards in the cases in which they have been evaluated.
In some cases. Sometimes the court talks about these unenumerated fundamental rights have to be deeply rooted in the nation's history and traditions. Sometimes the court says, they change the language, these unenumerated rights, like the right to assisted suicide we talked about, it's a potential unenumerated right. The right has to be implicit in the concept of ordered liberty. But you've read Obergefell. In Obergefell, I think Justice Kennedy wrote that opinion. He didn't bite. In fact, he cited with approval Justice Harlan's dissent in Poe v. Ullman. And Justice Harlan said, look, there's no formula here. Justice Harlan always said, you have to go case by case. Can you understand why some Americans go, wait a minute, are justices, these are unenumerated rights, are justices interpreting the Constitution, or are they just deciding a right when they get 5 votes, and it's just a moral conviction?
Yes, Senator, I do understand.
Okay. Well, when you talk about judicial restraint, where does the restraint start?
Okay, again, so again, we've been watching the confirmation hearings of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. And I see we have an unexpected guest, Frank Radford, who's, of course, been on Going Viral before.
I just want to say that I don't think we should confirm him as a senator.
Right. Well, again, so we've been watching a bit of the confirmation hearings, and since we have Frank here, why don't we start with him? Okay, Frank, you've been watching, Senator Kennedy, like on his first name. Again, he's from, I think, Alabama, if I remember right, but don't, I wouldn't put money on it. Certainly somewhere down south. So Frank, unmute, and so what do you think of what you heard with the confirmation hearings? And well, I'll just say, of course we know, they're going to try and Republicans are going to try and trip her up with, again, these kinds of questions, all of these judges, with all, since basically Judge Bork, they're all very well coached, about what to say, what not to say. And this whole kind of, pantomime, kabuki theater thing where, like, the judge will never tell you exactly where they'll vote on, any particular case that may come before them, even though pretty much, based on what they've already decided, usually you can figure out, again, how, and of course, which side is nominating them. So, yeah, so Frank, let's start with you. What do you think of what you just saw and the whole Supreme Court process? Yeah.
Oh, well, I haven't really thought about that much about it, but
well, it's going on, Frank. So
I know it's going on. I've been probably thinking of other things
yes, we know, but since you're here,
yeah. But the differentiation between Congress and Supreme Court, it's a fine line, I guess, at some point, and that's where they're arguing. I mean, it's she can be cagey on whether or not she'd go for what she would actually side with, and it's hard to pin her down if if you expect that to happen and her to fluff her lines. I can't imagine that. She's clearly articulate and exceedingly intelligent, and that's that's
and
you can hope for a lot.
I'm sure.
Well, I mean, she may be well coached. I mean, it may be all scripted, but nevertheless, she's able to put the thoughts across of whoever her handler was. I don't know, but it's different from others like Clarence Thomas, not as articulate by any stretch of the imagination as she is, and so it reflects well on the Supreme Court that she is smart. And so, I got no problem with it. But, whether or not at some point the setup itself is flawed, well, no, I don't think it's that flawed. I mean, you've got to have interpretation of the law at some point, but whether or not it should be, everything should be a referendum, that's absurd too. So, it's a process. You're following precedent. Should you overturn precedent? That's another issue, and probably will be asked. So I'm not overly concerned that I'm more Republican than I am a Republican, but not a Trumpian nut job. Centrist, and she's fit for the task, as far as I'm concerned. So I've really got anything profound to say. Okay.
Well, let me follow up. Let me follow up with a question for Frank. What do you think on the position of where should it be decided, the state or national level, in the court or legislature, whether or not transgender women who used to be men can compete in women's sports? Do you think it should? I'm not asking you even what decision should be, but who do you think should have the authority to stipulate or set that guideline or threshold?
Well, there used to be a thing called common sense, but there isn't anymore. That's basically, it's a sorry answer, but there is no common sense. So, you know, that's a tough one because it's you know, it's a political football and all that good stuff. But the way things are going, it's hard to deny that right. Once upon a time, when father knew best, right, back in the 50s, there'd be no question, right? It wouldn't even be countenanced. But, you know, the pendulum swings in the other direction. And as absurd as it may seem, and since there is no common sense, you know, it's whoever's got the votes, really. I mean, in this case, whether or not, you know, we don't know what she inwardly feels about this, and she's not going to divulge that. So, you know,
question isn't the decision on the question. It's a question of who has the authority to adjudicate. Whether that's the thing that the senator was asking. Should it belong in the Senate? I mean, in the, you know, in the legislature, or the executive, the judicial branch, or maybe in the state legislature, or maybe it should go school by school, or just be decided by sports teams.
The way it's set up is, you know, it's in its interpretation of the law. So, no, it can't be. Like I said, it can't go to a referendum. You know, it's like, oh, it just can't. So I think, yeah, it does reside in the judicial. So there it is. That's why I think of it. You know,
Well, you actually answered. You can run for Congress. You can go for
no,
you answered the question.
That's not helpful. I mean, as absurd as it seems, that's the final. The final arbiter is the Supreme Court, I guess.
All right, so let's let Victor. So, what do you think about all this? You know, argument, and you're muted, Victor. So you have to.
I'm mainly just trying to learn what's happening, and I guess in regard to an issue like the transgender rights and things, I guess my angle of interest is sort of outside the present conflict. The present conflict is a partisan conflict in disguise, and one hopes that that she'll be confirmed. That's what I have to say on that. But my interest in the underlying issues that are raised is how, in principle, one should decide those issues. And I favor a much more sort of traditional type of situation in which you have education of the whole community, input of the whole community. I mean, the transgender issue is a very complex issue which involves changing people's ways of thinking. And it's something that has to be discussed at every level. And I mean, my model for that in terms of constitution making is the idea that a constitution itself is something that should be the product of broad, organized public discussion. And I think we have an archaic constitution in many respects, as we know, especially from the whole problem of the Electoral College that we all know about. And in principle, there ought to be a completely different kind of setup that would correspond more to the real interests of the people. So that's a sort of, you might say it's a philosophical response to it. Right, but right. In the immediate thing, no, I hope she gets confirmed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. Dennis wants to unmute and comment, or I think he's doing other things. All right, so let's move on to what Frank probably came for. Let's do some pieces about the Ukraine.
Well, wait a minute. What have you answered it, Alex? I mean,
actually, okay. I'll answer Ken's question. Sure. No, actually, my point of view would be that any of those levels of government can, and obviously state legislatures can pass laws to deal with any one of these rights. The Congress certainly can pass laws, and the Supreme Court can also make decisions of precedents that essentially shape the law. So I think but I agree with you guys that, you know, essentially what tends to happen is that the Supreme Court, or the courts in general, wind up making these decisions, largely because I think various legislators, whether state or federal, kind of they've abrogated their responsibility. They
Well,
don't
wait,
want to
well,
make those kinds of
wait,
decisions.
wait,
You know?
wait. Victor's saying something completely different. He's saying that
Yeah,
the
right.
Constitution itself, it needs to be remodeled,
Well, no,
remodeled, I
yeah.
guess,
Again, I'm
according, well,
yes,
yeah, but wait, according to,
sure.
you know, what I think intellectuals of today determine what are the,
Right.
I guess,
Well, again, yeah,
the
I'm
more
more on his
wait.
side there. Yeah.
Well, the,
No,
that's
I
different
mean,
though.
you, Frank, you've heard the con.
That is essentially a revolutionary way of looking at it.
No,
It's like,
no, it's not necessary because again,
well, if you're going to change,
there's the
if
idea
you,
of the living Constitution, which is that, you know, you
well,
can't keep the Constitution where it was in the 18th century. I mean, I definitely do not agree with the ridiculous federalist
but,
interpretation
but
that, you
what?
know, that the Constitution is to be read literally based on what people thought, you know, in
No, of course,
1789, which I think
of
is
course, but
absolutely
that's, but
nonsensical.
that, but what is implied, I thought, from what Victor was saying, and he can correct me, of course, is that it needs to be changed fundamentally, in that it does not reflect today, and it cannot be, you cannot see the principles that were determined back then, and you cannot see that principle, and then new principles need to be determined, which is, you know, completely different. So it doesn't really matter whether she's anointed or not. I mean, as I understand it, you're asking for something entirely different. Am I right?
Well, I would want, you know, through the formal process, yeah, for us to write a new constitution. If it were politically possible, which obviously it isn't in this kind of the divided country we have. But I think, I mean, I would, you know, that's why I've always, you know, kind of philosophically and politically preferred, you know, the kind of English common law system even over our own, because it doesn't have that straitjacket of a written constitution that you have to, you know, there's the evolution of law in the United Kingdom that's, you know, occurred over, well, basically 800 years if you go back to the Magna Carta. So that kind of, you know, philosophy, again, you know, whatever legal ideas I have, yeah, it would be, you know, so you know, I never liked, you know, well, I won't say I'd never, you know, I, of course, like all Americans, got raised on, you know, got indoctrinated in kind of the ideology of the Constitution, but, you know, having, well, a more European outlook on these kinds of legal things, I always,
Yeah,
you know,
but you know,
once,
a principle is an anchor from which, you know, if all else fails, you go back to the principle. You don't just kind of willy-nilly come up with some kind of or whatever suits the, as you said, partisan attitude of the people. And even
well,
British
that's called
British law.
democracy, Frank. Isn't that what
Oh,
we
I
should
get
have?
it.
We
I
should,
get. Yeah, well,
the
that's the
law
point of
should
having a
reflect what the
constitution.
people want,
But
right?
you're saying that you've got this kind of state of flux sort of constitution that you can, you know, it's suddenly, well, it doesn't suit me right now, so because the people have changed. Now, are people changing? Well, certainly sperm levels are going down. Reproduction is going weird. There's far more transgender than there ever used to be. I mean, that's pretty clear. So maybe we are in need of a revision of the Constitution. I mean, a complete revision, maybe because people are, you know, asexual now more than they've ever been. So I don't know, you know, maybe you're right. I mean, but that's an argument you have to make. You can't just say, I don't like it. I don't like it today. I might like it tomorrow, but you know, the next day I want a new one. I mean, you've got to give a reason why it absolutely has to be changed, other than, you know, you don't like the ideology or something.
Well, if the Constitution truly had, you know, not changed hadn't been allowed, you know, there hadn't been any amendments since whatever the Bill of Rights, then the Constitution would have been junked by the American,
Well,
it would have
wait a
built
minute.
up to the point where people would have thrown the Constitution away as being unsuitable for a modern country.
Well,
Just because,
but what does that mean? Has human
well,
nature
okay, let me
changed?
give you one example, Frank. Like, how could you have a modern U.S. tax system without the income tax? Again, there was, I'm blanking on the number of 21st Amendment. There's the amendment that allows for an income tax. I think, for example, if that had, some world where that had never, you know, United States could not have continued to function as a modern country without a modern income tax. So that there would have been, you would have had to fundamentally change the basics of the Constitution if you couldn't get an amendment through to do that.
There
Or
are
say, obviously,
amendments.
if with the Civil
Amendments are
War, you
okay.
needed,
It allows for amendments. There's no question
yeah,
that it allows for amendment. But what you're saying is that it needs to be not revised, but actually trashed,
rewritten.
and then started afresh. Are you saying that human nature fundamentally has changed? Which that's an argument.
No, not
I started
fundamentally.
by saying,
History has changed. We
yeah, but
have different concerns. Technology has changed.
I'd like to throw something in here too, please. I
Sure.
just want to make a comment on what Frank said. I think a lot of the changes that you're seeing in society are due to the agricultural factor of adding estrogen into the cattle and into the chickens so that they're heavier at market. And that has had a change in the physiology of the public and caused deterioration in hormones. So estrogen pushes people towards their feminine side. That's basically what it's about. That's probably the cause of the increase in people. Oh, plus fad politics. What's getting marketed and pushed by psychologists. There's various stories about this. Well, you're upset. You're not distracted or depressed. You really want to change your gender, to the 6-year-old. But any event, I have another. Skipping that's just argumentative and sounds crazy, I know. But it happens to be the truth. But I did want to ask, because Victor made a statement that I was kind of surprised, and I think it's a very real politic. You made a statement that, well, all in all, she represents the political party that I favor, so I want her to be seated. That's what you said, like in a partisan fashion. You don't care that much how she answers questions or what her jurisprudence concepts are. She's basically on the left. So let's get her in. Is that correct?
Well, let's put it this way: the divisions within the Supreme Court are ideological divisions, and the divisions do correspond to some extent to the divisions that exist in the party system, and but I put that whole aspect of it in parentheses because my real feeling, my underlying feeling, which is what I got to, is that all these decisions require a different kind of basis, and that's based on the idea that the system that we have in place, the Constitution and everything about it, is entirely undemocratic. It reflects the interests of a ruling class, and we, or let's say I, and I think maybe some of you agree with me, think that the society should be more egalitarian, more democratic and everything. So that implies a totally different system for governance. And this would apply also in matters involving interpretation of precedent and all that, where the element of public participation and education and informed discussion would come into play. Now, I understand, and Alex has made this point too, which I agree with you. This is not on the agenda right now. Right now, we're involved in a political struggle in which, for example, there's a question of whether there's going to continue to be voter suppression, and the right wing in the Supreme Court, which overturned the Voter Rights Act, wants to sort of be stronger, and in terms of, let's say, both immediate and longer range strategy, we hope to expand the electorate. And so that's just one example of a dimension in which rulings made by the Supreme Court can be important, and someone who can present a strong argument on that issue, even though it won't persuade the conservative still majority that's going to exist, it nonetheless can provide a basis in terms of the way things operate for subsequent decisions that would be more favorable to expanding the electorate, which is can be seen as part of the longer term process of transformation. You know, it's step by step, and it needs to be much more,
Right. And one other perspective is, you know, Joe Biden was elected in part because, you know, and he made a point about saying, you know, elect me so I can, you know, replace the next Supreme Court justice with someone of, you know, our side essentially. And a majority of the voters didn't, and, you know, not just that, but a majority of the electoral college, the whole majority of, you know, all those states voted for him, and so he should have the right to appoint a justice that you know.
Well, in the name of
what he believes in.
Thank
so
you, but
that's an expression of the American people's.
And thank you. In the name of real politics, which seat is she replacing? A left seat or a right seat?
Breyer. He's like in his 80s. He retired. You know.
Yeah. Well, he's not off yet.
So
he's not off yet. But is he left or right?
Oh, he's appointed by.
Forget where he's appointed by.
No, but he's left or right? He's left. Yeah.
So he's left. So this is not a change in the balance in the court.
You wouldn't need to have one of the Republicans, you know, step down or most likely die, or for Biden to get a chance to.
So this won't accomplish what you want, correct?
Well, it's not going to change the court, no. But it's, you know, it does mean that, you know, if getting this done before, you know, the 2022 elections means that, you know, we won't have what we had with Justice Garland, you know, where the Republicans just don't allow anybody new to be seated on the court, and wait until a Republican becomes president so they can install someone from their side to shift the court even more right. But
so
Dennis, we haven't had Dennis's up.
It's a defensive move. Do you agree, Victor?
Well, what I say is it's not going to change the left-right balance on the court, but within the, let's say, the more progressive elements, you can have stronger or weaker positions. And if she would be rejected, there'd be pressure on Biden to appoint someone who's weaker. And that's really the essence of it.
Oh, okay.
Well, let's see if Dennis.
I'm curious what Frank thinks about that politically.
But wait, we haven't given Dennis.
Okay, Dennis.
Dennis, if you want to comment on the Supreme Court hearings, unmute and give us your 2 cents. You're still muted, Dennis. You got to hit the button.
You can go up to 4 cents too.
Wait, okay. Can you tell Ton? Okay, all right, Dennis. Yeah.
I like her.
Okay.
I am. The problem is the Democrats, not her, not the candidate. The problem is the Senate who gets elected in the Senate, and I mean, I think she's a good candidate. I think she'll do very well, and we're hoping that some Republicans will vote for her.
Yeah, well, we'll see. All right, Kenny, you wanted to ask Frank something. So.
Oh no, yeah. What Frank think about in terms of what Victor was saying, that which is very astute. It's not that she would shift the balance, but if she doesn't get appointed, Biden might go for someone closer to the middle of the road, which would be detrimental to the scope of considerations in the Supreme Court. I'm paraphrasing what I think he meant. But what do you think, Frank, in terms of the political aspect of getting her nominated?
Well, it's a possibility, I guess, but it's extremely unlikely that she won't get selected. But as far as voter suppression goes, I think that's a bit of an emotive term tell you the truth. It's like the Republicans refuse, I mean, this was Trump's fault, refused to believe that the mail-in voting would be such a threat. And it was. So, you know, they need to adapt. I mean, it's more tactical than it is, you know, a fundamental blow to individual rights. I mean, that wasn't supposed to be as effective as it was. I don't think it, when because of COVID, that's why, you know, you had mail-in voting. So it went from being, I think, under the radar of the right, and then suddenly they realized that's exactly, you know, that is why they lost. And I think next time around, you know, I mean, they've tried to readjust things, but you know, it's out of the bag. So I think they probably will start to accept it as part of the voting mechanism now. So they can't avoid it. And so I don't think, you know, you can call it voter suppression and trying to fix certain states, but I think that they're all, you know, either way, they're just going to adapt to it. And I don't suspect you're going to get that, you know, if you're a Democrat, you're going to get that massive advantage through it like you did. So same with the Supreme Court. When somebody dies, what's her face? The one that should have retired before she died.
Ginsburg.
I'm sorry, yeah, Ginsburg. She should have gone way back because that was not right for her to stay till she dropped. You know, from the point of view, this is again, it's a strategic mistake that the Democrats made. I mean, they should have pressured her to resign early so that they could replace her. I mean, that's just bad planning. I don't think that, you know, we've got something that's questioning the, you know, the bedrock of our, you know, what the judicial side of it. So it's more ho-hum from my point of view. I don't, you know, emotive terms like, oh my God, the right's going to take over the Supreme Court. Well, they took it over because the other guys were asleep at the wheel, not because there's some kind of devious kind of power play here. I mean, really, the Democrats were basically asleep at the wheel, and likewise, the Republicans were asleep at the wheel when voting rights, you know, the mail-in voting became the way to win, which it will be in the future probably. So that's the way I see it.
That's pretty clear. Yeah.
Do you want to go to a piece, Ken? Or you're muted, Ken. You muted yourself.
Yes, I support moving to another topic. That's my
Okay,
vote.
so let's
I'm
go to
gonna
what
take
Frank
the
is.
opportunity
What Frank? Oh,
to
go on, Victor.
excuse myself. I just, no, I have limited time, but I enjoyed talking.
Okay, thank you for being here, Victor.
Thanks very much.
Great to have you as always.
Enjoyed
Okay,
seeing you. Thank you.
okay. Farmers in Ukraine.
In Ukraine, not everyone is fleeing or fighting. These farmers have stayed put to do their job, just as their president asked them to.
People who work in the agricultural sector, such as veterinarians or people who are involved in the next seedlings, the army will not mobilize them. These people are exempt for 6 months.
100 kilometers from the fighting, this farm operates as normal, and it is vital for Ukraine that it continues to do so. Without farmers like Sergei, the country would go hungry.
The military have their battle, farmers also have theirs. We must feed our soldiers and our Ukrainian nation.
Farmers all over Ukraine are facing huge difficulties. They have seen delayed seed deliveries and shortages of fuel, but above all, it is proving impossible to sell on their stock.
We have almost 500 tons of corn behind me. We have a lot of problems. The seaports that allow us to export are closed. No transactions take place. We don't sell our grain.
With many ports blocked by Russian forces and others ceasing operations due to fighting, Ukraine currently cannot export any of its goods. Ukraine was one of the world's biggest exporters of wheat, and with no sales possible for the foreseeable future, one of the country's largest sources of profit has disappeared.
The streets of Kyiv are empty. The inhabitants are not allowed to leave their home before tomorrow 7 a.m. Usually the Ukrainian forces use this curfew in order to search for Russian or pro-Russian saboteur or recon groups. But this time, according to the mayor of the city, this curfew is imposed because the authority expect further shelling from the Russian forces. And we heard this morning several times air raid siren soundings in the capital, followed by some loud explosion. The day before yesterday, a huge shopping mall was bombed and completely destroyed. At least 8 people were killed and several surrounding buildings were damaged. And it's true that there is a fear here that this type of strikes will intensify because around Kyiv, most of the battlefronts are now completely blocked.
Well, so Russia continues to bombard Kyiv. What can you tell us about attacks on the outskirts?
Well, there are some effective counterattacks from the Ukrainian side. But yesterday, for instance, we were at the entrance of the town of Irpin, northwest of Kyiv. And despite increasing artillery fire, Russian troops hold 2 districts in this city, but they are not making significant progress. We witnessed there yesterday some fighting. According to several sources, Ukrainian forces are trying to prevent Russian troops from placing their artillery position closer to the capital. But what we saw is, and what is taking shape for Kyiv now, is siege artillery who can last pretty long with more and more use of strikes inside the capital.
That's our correspondent in
are dependent on Russian and Ukrainian grain. So this is going to have, an impact. And one of the pieces we'll play later from DW said that in Germany, the price for bread is already going up. So Ken, why don't we start with your response to those 2 pieces?
I'm not that familiar with this.
The point about, if they can't use their ports, then you're going to have to, put them on trains and to like a European port and ship them that. So and obviously that's much more expensive, takes more time. So there are definite economic problems coming out of this.
Yeah, but I don't know all the factors. Yes, I'm sure this could escalate into a major difficulty. I did listen to a lecture about one of the reasons why China will not get very close to supporting Russia, because they don't want to get any sanctions, because the yuan and the ruble are not going to replace the dollar, and China doesn't want to lose its position.
We'll see, because
it doesn't want to be sanctioned.
The Saudis talked about, selling oil to China.
Yeah, but it's
so
going.
If that starts to happen, then things will shift.
Well, anyhow, so this one analyst thought that
the
one statement he made that was interesting to me was Xi Jinping said, we'll be able to reacquire Taiwan by 2050. So he's very patient. He's very patient. So he's not going to make radical moves.
Actually,
he spent about 10 years making these 3 islands that are now militarized, right?
Right.
In the South China Sea.
More than 3, actually.
Well, whatever he did, but he moved slowly. Trying not to alert. He's not bombing any place that we're aware of, and he's doing it economically, and he's going to play it smart and conservatively. Why should he change anything? China is growing at 5%. They were growing at 6 or 7% during the pandemic. And now they're a little bit upset because they're down to 5%.
And they're gonna have an advantage over the U.S. and Europe.
Yeah,
they can get cheaper oil and natural gas from Russia than Europe will be able to.
So it's sort of like we're playing checkers and they're playing Go. or
Right.
no,
But
whatever.
I'm pretty sure Frank is going to disagree with you on the China thing. So
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Frank.
I know Frank is probably
Hey,
Frank.
We
Yeah,
should go
could-
to China. We got to
no,
go on
no.
vacation there. I'll take
Yeah,
you
yeah.
there.
No, yeah, that's absolutely not quite what I've said. What was absolutely true to me was that had Putin succeeded in that 3-day decapitation strike, the blitzkrieg, the immaculate blitzkrieg, then absolutely Taiwan was in the crosshairs within 3 or 4 years.
Right.
Now everything is in question, including Xi Jinping's presidency after November. So the fact that Putin went through with this, and it was sort of approved of by Xi Jinping, I think that's because the dominant military was the Russian one. They said they with all the exercises they do with the Chinese, sort of convinced them that, yeah, we know what we're doing. Well, in fact, they don't. They've demonstrated that they do not. Not only, what the Russian military has done is a disgrace to everything that Russia has ever done militarily.
Right.
What they're doing is okay, yes, there are examples in their history where they've gone overboard against civilians. I mean, there's no question about that. But this far exceeds anything that they've done before, and there's nothing honorable about what they're doing. And they could have done this honorably. And when I say that, I mean, it sounds bizarre, but you can fight wars such that at the end of the day, when everybody's dead on the battlefield, you respect the other side. I mean, that is the way generalship, it's one of those weird things that have happened over the course of time. You can shake hands at the end of the day if you've got hands to shake with, but this is a total a moral disgrace that their forebears would look upon this and be absolutely chagrined. It just doesn't make sense what they're doing. Now, it's true that you've got weapon systems like the thermobarics, you've got potential to use chemicals like sarin or just a plain old chlorine, and they are tempting. But still, even in a conventional mano-a-mano kind of battle, even if you use them, it's still possible to come through with your head somewhat held high. There's nothing here for the Russian army to be proud of. Nothing. They've just been defeated by a small village, Volodinsk. There's footage of it. The villagers showed this footage when they corralled this tank unit and then just wiped it out. I mean, it's the most pathetic thing you've ever seen. And they're all jumping up and down. These guys aren't even regulars. They were equipped, it has to be said, with some decent stuff. I mean, they had the M-Laws from Britain and, the odd, plenty of RPGs, but this tank unit was completely waxed. And you saw the tank unit coming in on footage, the webcams as they came in from the traffic webcams. And amazing, absolutely amazing. And this is something that's being seen all over the place in Ukraine. So what are they going to do in Mariupol? Well, I think they're going to have to just go the next step. If they use chemicals, I mean, they're going to use it. I mean, that will not necessarily. Now, there was a Brit saying that, even with chemicals, if the civilians are basically clued in a bit with, leaflets telling them what to do, they can get around that too. You got to go to high ground. You got to avoid being in the, as soon as you know that you're being hit by this distinctive sound, you're being hit by canisters of whether it's chlorine or sarin, you go high ground and you go into the wind because it dissipates very quickly. And then you got to take your clothes off because you're going to be contaminated. I mean, obviously that's, if you're a babushka, you're not going to do that. But if you're a young person, and you can probably protect your children to a certain extent, or babies anyway. Now, obviously that's not a practical way of looking at it, but they are dying of dehydration right now. So even though there's a river that runs through it, there is, there's obviously a timidity. They don't want to get out of their cellars. So I'm not sure how long they've got. Actually, I can't see it more than.
And we can't know how much ammunition.
No, it's not a question of ammunition. They've got plenty of ammunition. It's a question of whether or not they've got the governor, and Zelensky has to make the decision based on the fact that they're dying by the thousands. Okay. If they start dying by the thousands through either chemical or just basic dehydration, the decision becomes harder and harder to stick to it. And it's not they don't even have to move a muscle, the Russians or the people from, the rebels from Donetsk, they don't have to do anything, the separatists, because what they've got is basically rats in a trap. Well, they're not rats, but, they're human beings in a trap, and it's, there's no question of humanitarian assistance. Red Cross aren't allowed in. So it's a hard choice. And if that's a victory, it does not reflect well on the Russian military, that's for sure. And if they hang out on for more than a few days and they actually start dying in heaps, that will get out to the Russian public. And when that gets out, I don't know what's going to happen. Even
you're saying the Ukrainians dying or Russians?
Well, who else? I mean, obviously thousands dying. It's obviously the civilians. If they start dying in heaps, from chemical and dehydration, that information will get out. The bodies will be there, and once that gets to the Russian public, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. So it would behoove the Russians to go in there militarily, but they'll get their clock cleaned. They're going to get their clock cleaned again and again and again. They have demonstrated no ability to do this because they haven't got communications. They haven't got the proper communication anymore, and they haven't got the unity of command. They lack all these things. Now, what they may also do with Odessa is blow up the piers, blow up the docks, blow up. I don't know if they'll make it a permanently damaged, such that that it's almost irrecoverable. But that seems to be the model. They're making Kharkiv, Sumy, and Mariupol and parts of Kyiv. I think the intent was with all of Kyiv, making it essentially something like at least $1 trillion to put it back together again. And who's going to, if they take over, if they take all, which the likely thing is for them to go all the way to the Dnieper River, if they take it all over, who's going to pay for it? They're not. So this is going to be a complete wasteland. Not only is it a wasteland, it was essentially thriving in many respects, but obviously agriculture will go to zero. And then that's a world phenomenon. Do they want a world disaster? I mean, they being Putin and his cronies, clearly they may have thought that through. Maybe they want, because what's going on in Russia is a disaster with the sanctions over time. Maybe they want that kind of chaos in the world to exploit that. I mean, that's what the Soviets were good at that, very good at it. I don't know, it's a KGB plan. I mean, this is pathetic. But I can't see any alternative to this, unless they're beaten, and they are being beaten systematically by the Ukrainians in places. But this, around Mariupol, if they're not careful, this will be the catalyst for change in Russia, big time. If they continue to do what they're doing without Red Cross corridors. So,
well, don't I agree with you? But I did
In
want
what way
to move
don't
on
you?
to,
What's your interpretation?
well, again, as you know, I don't agree with you that the Russians are lacking command coordination. I think they've,
That's
haven't
the
done.
consensus by just about everybody and their mother that they are. They
Well,
can't get
again,
their act.
we're seeing a very as my opinion is we're seeing a very one-sided view of the war. As you know, even the Financial Times had an article yesterday where they point out, well, with all these videos that the Russians, because of what happened in 2014 with the invasion of Crimea, the Russian military, they take, the ordinary soldiers, they take your cell phone away, so they can't videotape all the tanks and equipment that they're destroying or capturing. So
In,
you don't get to see, there's a bias in that, and that
oh, wait a minute.
we're
Wait a minute.
seeing all
There-
this
it's-
video. We're
you're
not
talking.
seeing as much video from the Russian side that
You're
would,
talking about. You're talking about the Financial Times. Well, the equivalent of the British organization known as Sibylline. Sibylline represents businesses, and they have consistently said negative things about the Ukrainians and how this steamroller, basically they use that sort of term, is going to roll over everything. Now, why would they say that? Because business does not want this thing to last. They want it over fast. Well, that was back then. It isn't over fast. So, they've been saying stuff that it's the preferred way of looking at it from business's point of view, because this is lousy for business.
Right. And again, you've had again, anonymous British defense official admitting, oh, the Ukrainians could still lose, essentially. So why is MOD, or I suppose it could be somebody from British intelligence saying that. I mean, that's not from business. That's from somebody within the government saying,
I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you that well, I
just think things are too unclear.
No, it's not unclear. It's not unclear. What's on the ground at the moment? They are not demonstrating, except if the next round, I mean, this round has failed. If they get their logistics in place, I mean, we were talking about that the other night, where they've actually got railheads into Ukraine
and pipelines
into Ukraine, and they've got supplies coming to the troops, and they go into a defensive mode, and then this is after Mariupol must fall. Okay, if they do that, then it will be very difficult for Ukraine to do anything. But that's why it's a time crunch. That's going to take at least 2 months, I estimate, for that to be possible. Within that 2-month period, the Ukrainians, as I said, are systematically defeating the Russians in place, even when they're on the defense, because they cannot coordinate anything. Their communications has failed completely. So it's actually a turning point, an inflection point we're looking at right now. And I think that the longer that Mariupol holds, the worse it is for the Russians. So they know that. That's why they may go to an extremist. But, and they may go to an extremist with their naval units. They may try a suicidal amphibious landing route in Odessa, which would be catastrophic for them. But, they may be forced to do it. They may try it into Mariupol, by the way. And that still could be suicidal as well. So, it's going to get interesting day by day. But nevertheless, even if they win, and I don't think they will, you're still going to have a desolate eastern Ukraine which was flourishing. No agriculture and no nothing. I mean, you had neon gas, you had all kinds of things coming out of that area of between Mariupol and Odessa that was necessary for the world. particularly agriculture. It's gone. I mean, aviation too. There was an aviation industry there, gone, all gone. And who's going to pay for it? The Russians aren't. They're just going to sit on, decaying rubbish. I mean, and what do they get from this? This is so stupid.
Well, it depends what their end goal is. But let me move on to another.
You tell me what.
I'm not sure, Frank. I mean, it could. One thought I've had, and some other people have suggested, is that what you're saying is actually what they want. That they will again, except from again the eastern parts, meaning just the Donetsk and Luhansk republics, and again the Kherson, they'll just leave the rest of it all devastated and just withdraw and so leave it to the Ukrainians essentially. And it's your problem now. Not even try and occupy it. But again, I want to get to other pieces since I don't think Ken prepared.
I mean, actually, that's a rather critical question there.
Let me just chime in. Frank's scenario is obviously potential. It could occur that way, just like any alternative thing could happen. They could drop bombs. China could invade Russia. We could get hit by a comet. There's lots of things that could happen. But what Frank is saying is correct. They could leave a devastated Ukraine and just hold on to a small portion of it, and then receive the disdain of the entire European continent and everywhere else in the world.
That. No, that's not.
So then it's hopeless. We don't know. So there you go. But I think Frank's scenario is feasible. Unfortunately. Okay, let's move on, Alex. Come on, go ahead.
Okay. So I found this piece on, we didn't talk about it last week, but last week, there we go. Okay. In Saudi Arabia, the government there executed 81, meaning, decapitated them, had them heads chopped off with a sword, 81 mostly political prisoners. And obviously this has been commented on by,
come on, pop it up.
Quite a few number of people. So here we have Breakthrough News, who of course used before. They interviewed an actual Saudi political prisoner, an activist who has been through the Saudi political system, so he can tell you exactly what goes on there. Which again, we see is not, it's pretty horrific.
At least it's one man's opinion. Let's hear it.
Well, no, it's based on, but it's backed up by, organizations like Amnesty International reporting. So his comments are based on truth, and everybody knows what Saudi Arabia does essentially.
We want to start with a story that many. We want to start with a story that many of you may have seen over the weekend. The nation of Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, executed 81 people in one day. We are very honored to be joined as we continue the show here by Ali Al-Ahmed, the director of the Institute for Gulf Affairs, and a former Saudi political prisoner. Ali, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you so much for having me. Hi, Randy. How are you?
Hello.
Mario, good to see you again.
If you could, Ali, give us some context for this. I think a lot of people saw, Saudi Arabia executes 81 people, but I think a lot of people were wondering, well, who are these people? What did they do? How does this fit into it? There wasn't a lot of context given in the mainstream media beyond sort of the headlines.
Well, there were 41 protesters and activists who are from the Shia regions in Saudi Arabia. 7 were Yemenis, 1 Syrian, and the rest were from different parts of the country. The 41, like I said, protesters and part of the Shia community who were active. The Yemenis lived there, and they were accused of having sympathies to the Yemenis who are fighting the Saudi invasion. And they were blamed for basically 2 were captured during battles with the Saudis, these prisoners of war, and they were still executed. The remainder are accused, ISIS people who were accused by the Saudi government of carrying out attacks. But we don't know because Saudi Arabia and its system is a very closed system. The court system is closed, and the information obviously is very controlled. So we don't know exactly their real offenses. But even though if they were if we believe the Saudi government, these were members of ISIS or other extremist groups, there is no way certain to confirm that. Especially we have a history with the Saudi government that they torture everyone basically who is arrested on these or similar charges, political charges, and confessions is the main way of convicting people, and it's usually 99% derived from severe torture. And I've written 20 years ago a report, and I think it was the only report on torture and the methods, because I was behind bars, at some point, and I know how they do it, and I've interviewed a lot of people and familiar with the tactics and the way they convict people. So no one who's sentenced in Saudi courts is sentenced fairly, and these sentences should not be accepted by anyone, even against those who actually committed crimes.
Ali, what has been the response from the so-called international community? And of course, when we say international community, this usually refers to the US and European countries, which are in this case all very closely allied with the Saudis, despite the fact that they go around the world imposing punishing policies on countries in the name of human rights and democracy. What has been their reaction to this mass execution in Saudi Arabia?
First of all, we need to know one thing that's important. It has not been reported that these executions were carried on the order of Mohammed bin Salman himself, MBS. This level of execution in Saudi Arabia cannot be carried out or put to reality unless the order comes from what we call the royal court, which is the king's palace basically, that issues this order. King Salman is not, he doesn't have his wits about him. The person in charge is Mohammed bin Salman. Secondly is with the US reaction, the main backer of the Saudi monarchy has been basically non-existent. Even during the State Department briefing, where a reporter asked Ned Price about it, he refused to answer or to comment. Even those what I call plastic statements, oh, we are deeply concerned, and we are engaging the Saudis on these issues, and we look forward to continuing working with them and improving the conditions. He even refused to do that, and that's really an expression. It's very important to focus on that. It's an expression that they don't give an F about these souls. It's not even worth a statement. An empty statement has no bearing on anything. Even that, they did not see it fit to issue a statement, either initially or in response to a question. So that tells you the real position. And MBS, if he had thought this would bring even some level of criticism, I don't think he would have carried these executions. What made matters worse, the second day, on Monday, I believe, the top U.S. official in charge of promoting human rights and democracy, Azra Zia, received the former Saudi Minister of Justice, who actually was part of setting this movement of arresting and sentencing some of these people to death. And he had already been part of many executions and torture and abusing women's rights, and you name the list. And she praised him. He was in the State Department, photos published. And so it's like receiving somebody who just gassed some people and said, "Oh, this person is great," and that shows you the level of disconnection and the real policy. The English government, the UK, didn't have even a statement. The European Union had a statement that's it's like the usual word salad that does not condemn or let alone lay sanctions on these people who are involved. So yeah, the international reaction has been non-existent. It's important also to realize that the wire services, when they reported the story, they carried the narrative of the government. They did not give the counter narrative of the human rights organizations, especially the indigenous human rights organizations, which they know. I'm familiar with all of these people who write these stories, and I said, call this guy, he knows about this, he's involved. So they did not only not provide the narrative, the alternative narrative, or use the word protesters, because if you say protesters in the wire service instead of terrorists, that makes the Saudis look bad, and it kind of embarrasses their backers in the Washington and London and other Western capitals.
And one thing that I'm curious about is, I mean, how does this feel like this is sort of out of step with the typical Saudi behavior? I mean, I think people see things like 81 people executed and they're, shocked, and they should be. I mean, but is this sort of criminalization and use of death sentences, particularly against, protest movements and those fighting for democracy, is this a usual thing for Saudi Arabia, or is this an outlier?
It's important to realize one thing, that the Saudi monarchy, the clan, view protesters as more dangerous than people who carry on armed attacks or terrorist attacks. Because the peaceful protest I'm just going to use one example of he's the brother of a friend of mine who you can see him on video walking in the street and says no to death penalty, and he's one of those people who was tortured severely and executed. So that idea not only threatens the Saudis, because the Saudi government always wanted to give this narrative, which is being replicated or in the West, that the enemies of the Saudi monarchies are these extremists. You know, if we lose the Saudis, we're going to have an ISIS government, and so on. So this narrative is destroyed by people who walk in the street and say stop killing people, stop. So I think the reason that the West wants to keep that, and you can see that in the article of the Atlantic. I remember one time I came across Darrell Issa, the congressman, and I spoke to him, and he's like, "Oh, if we leave the Saudis, we're going to get ISIS." I said, "This is false choice, because there's people like me, many people like me, who wants democracy and human rights and women's rights and all these rights, and even better than the United States." So, but the narrative must be Saudi Arabia or the worst evil. So the lesser evil argument has been used to justify these things. In terms of shock, this is not the first time that the Saudis kill people. This is the Saudi Arabia, the Saudi monarchy has a long history of massacres of thousands of people. Even if you go back to the 1915 or 1925, sorry, when they killed basically nearly 3,000 Yemeni pilgrims who were coming to Yemen killed all of them, and that's called the Tanua massacre. So massacres are part of the Saudi genealogy, in fact, the Saudi monarchy genealogy.
Okay, so that gives us an idea of some of the background behind this recent mass execution that happened, I think, in Riyadh. Well, I believe in Riyadh again. And again, they literally, behead people with a sword. So this is, Old Testament kind of method. But Dennis, why don't we start with you? What are your thoughts after hearing that about, Saudi human rights?
The Saudis are a disgrace, and they're being backed up by the Americans. And I think we should talk about who the United States supports, fascist regimes, and do something about it. I think we need an anti-imperialist movement in the streets, and we have to make the United States to be held responsible for what they're doing. The Saudis could be they can be stopped by the U.S. If the U.S. doesn't want to do it because they buy so much military equipment.
Phone call from Biden would do it.
Right. And they want them to sell us more oil now to compensate for what we're not going to get from the Russians. So, but okay. So I think Ken,
I have a solution. I think I know I and all of my friends are going to boycott. We're not going to Mecca this year.
Were you intending to beforehand? You're going to make the Hajj, Ken? And I know you had converted. I know you had, because you're not allowed to go if you're not a Muslim. It's in fact illegal. It's I mean,
well,
famously,
if I can convert,
going back to the 19th century.
No, wait a minute. There are 542 different forms of sexual gender.
Islam.
So there's 542 versions of being a Muslim. I could be a Muslim that hates Muhammad.
Be a Muslim
I
Christian.
could be a Muslim who never, doesn't go to. I could do anything and be a Muslim. It's just a different kind of Muslim.
Yeah.
It's a musher Muslim or something.
Maybe, I mean, are there Muslims?
We're not going to the Hajj. We're not going to the Hajj. No Hajj this year. Not for me. I'm not going. I don't care what you do. I'm not going.
All right, Ken. Well, let's let Frank has any thoughts on this.
Not a lot. I mean, my wife was doing a fair bit when Khashoggi was.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Look, there's the ideal world, and then there's the practical one. they have power, like it or not. If we were all to go clean energy tomorrow, then that would be a different story.
That'd be screwed, yeah. And the Russians too, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. But that is not the case. So Islam has been around for a while, and it hasn't conformed with the way the Christian world has wanted on more than one occasion.
Depends which Islam you're talking about. Again, they're more secular. They're, the Saudis, Wahhabism is the most extreme, one of the most extreme versions of the religion, as we know.
Absolutely. And that, where the madrasas have their influence at the various highest levels, we don't know, right? We can't pinpoint that, but it's there. So it's
right. I mean, we have a pretty clear idea that the people in 9/11 are connected.
Wait. We've got the same issue with the Hindus. It's like we've got the same issue with the Islam in Pakistan. It's once it is the cement of people. Religion is a very strong cement, and you can do sooty and burn your wife on your funeral pyre, and nobody gives a crap. It just is what has to be dealt with in the 21st century when they're way back in the I don't know what century. So there's realpolitik. First of all, you're right. We need the oil right about now. It's like he probably knows it. That's probably why he executed 81 people. It's like, thumb your nose at. I can thumb my nose at anybody because they need me. That's MBS for you. What a guy. He's at war with the Houthis, and they're no angels. They're no angels, that's for sure. The Iranians, same deal. I mean, Israel is between a rock and a hard place. It has to deal with Russia because otherwise there is 400 to shoot their crap down if they try to take out the Iranians, the Hezbollah. So, what are you going to do? Everything is, there's one hand tied behind your back by the other side, and it's slick diplomacy on their part. To a sense, well, not that slick, but the fact is, it's oil has a power all its own. Don't know the answer to that. I know it's easy to say, well, you're all hypocrites because you deal with them. Yeah, I guess so. You deal with the rest of the world. If the rest of the world is full of nut jobs, all the world's mad save you and me, and even you're a little strange. So that kind of thing, you got to deal with it. I wish there was the Khashoggi thing went nowhere. I mean, there was some, they kind of, they didn't even, it wasn't even a smack on the back of the wrist. It was nothing. So, it's the reality of the time. So that's not very helpful.
But I want to bring this piece up, and we'll do maybe, one or two.
Do I think that it's
it's a valid, it's, would you agree that that's what should be done, that we should, we should
suppress it where? In the U.S. or in Russia?
All over. Again, they didn't release the poll because it essentially showed that Putin is doing well, and they thought that would promote the war.
Well, this is going on for the last 2 years very strongly. I guess it's been going on for the last 200 years. The media has an attitude like most of the people on this panel who has ever been here has a very stable concept that the American public are stupid. I hear that all the time from the different panelists here. The American public are stupid, and that's why we can't have a revolution and so forth and so on. So therefore, the media has the same viewpoint, and they say we have to put this out because these people don't know, so they can't see this and they have to see that, and don't challenge this and don't challenge that. So it's all a wash. They've been doing that for, the last 2 years has been very strong evidence of that. Especially, when we got the internet and we said, aha, we broke the ice. We're no longer subject to the propaganda coming out of the mainstream media. Well, it grew up, and you got a monopoly going with like Google and Facebook and Twitter and so forth. And then they did the same thing with the same degrees of propaganda and influence. And, different terminology came up. It said, your cells, you're living in your own cell, your own, group limiting. So they call it analogs or whatever they call it, algorithms. They're going to give you the news they want that you want to see. It's going to keep you in your cell, and they're not going to allow certain other things. So in this case, as it occurs, my wife spoke with the guy who wrote Future Shock.
Oh, Toffler?
Yeah. About this during
He's still alive? Isn't he in his
No, this
80s?
was a long time ago.
Oh,
This
a
was
long time ago.
During
Okay.
the time when there was the Bosnian, and there was a lot of
In the
criticism,
90s, yeah.
and it was like the Bosnians were saying, promoting people to go out and kill each other, and the same thing happened in Africa with the Hutus and the Tutsi in Rwanda. So, and then, Tefla wrote an article or a chapter about this too, saying you have to consider the fact of media as an aspect of war, which is valid, and as a factor of government. And maybe you shouldn't tell people to, look, like this. If you put out a news article and you say, be very careful about the salmon you eat this week. If you bought this salmon in the last 3 weeks, throw it out because there's salmonella, right? Or news like the riots in Miami. I just saw this yesterday.
Yeah.
I've known about these spring break riots in Miami every year, but maybe somebody hears about that, so they have a right to know that, so they don't go down into a dangerous zone, and so forth. So there's a lot of public information that is slightly prejudicial or exaggerated, which is probably to the benefit of the public. That's true. Should you interfere with the public? I think forget about it. What's advertising? Come on. It's not a point. As long as somebody has the right to come up and say, this media agency is not divulging the full truth, or they're distorting it, or they're exaggerating it. As long as you have the right to counter to what someone else said.
Sure.
Then
And they're
you can
telling you what the
tolerate it.
truth is anyway. In this case, they're saying, well, we're not going to release the poll.
That's
But
right. Then they might as well.
that they're not releasing it because it shows this is the same thing as the official poll. It
Right.
shows that Putin is doing very well with public opinion. So
Yeah, maybe
they're kind of
in
telling
Russia.
you what
In
they were
Russia.
not trying to tell you anyway.
That's right.
It's like, what's the point?
That's right. You got to watch. They know what they're doing.
Right.
The
But, let's
trickiest
see.
thing is, I see with the news media is the silliest, obvious canard where they say, according to a lot of people, or according to other people, according to somebody. And so the guy doesn't want to say it himself.
Right. And we all.
So he
we all
says,
know
according to,
how
I hear
polls-
people are saying, and they do that. And then the other thing is, when they're covering some news article and they don't have any information, there's a fire or a riot or whatever it is, they start interviewing people on the street. What do you think about this? Does this happen a lot in your neighborhood? What's that news? You asking people, what do you think? Who do you vote for? I mean, who do you support? The Yankees or the Dodgers? I mean, it's like, that's not news. The news is how many cops got shot, what was the guy doing, where are they going, did they catch him? Things like that. So they don't always do that. Same thing with the war. They're covering so many things on the Ukraine with like children killed and all of that crap. Now, let me ask you, Alex. I heard the number of casualties in the Ukraine. Somebody said 800. That can't be right.
No, that's far too low on either side. Yeah.
Well, I hear on the Russian side.
You mean civilians or
Civilians.
I mean, I think I think that's the UN reporting, and that's just.
Well, 800
they
people.
Can't, for a comparison.
I mean,
in the month, where we invaded and took Baghdad and Iraq, I think the numbers there, and this is again at post-war, again after they figured out, okay, they did some good report. They estimate something like 5,000 Iraqi civilians were killed in the month of the actual, conventional fighting, the advance to Baghdad. So
of civilians.
Again, I think a similar size, maybe. I think Iraq's population is a little bit smaller than.
Well, and also at the beginning of this conflict.
Right, and the total numbers of dead was 15,000, again, including Iraqi soldiers. So about
okay, then, but let's say
Iraqi soldiers, 5,000 civilians killed.
5,000 civilians. Here we got 800 civilians according to the UN, and Shevardnadze said at the beginning of this, if you're a citizen, show me your passport, I'm giving you a gun. So he just said he armed the civilians, okay? And they got the women and children out, because they're really not feminists. So but they gave the men.
Yeah, if you're a civilian, how with the gun, near some Russian troops, you don't have any protection in that case.
No, here's a gun.
Even if it was like a case of like, okay, somebody had, their a personal weapon is coming out, not distributed by the government. Yeah,
well, I mean, 800 dead.
Become a valid target at that.
800 dead.
That's
I mean, 800 civilians. Well, let me make a statement.
Underestimate.
All right, let's say the magnitude of 800 or double that, 1,600 in a month during an invasion or the drop in bombs. It sounds
if that is the real number, that's very low.
I know it's very low.
Considering all the fighting in the city.
It sounds like a weekend in Detroit.
Right.
It's not that bad.
And then obviously again apparently some of these people they handed out guns to were, of course, criminals. So then they wound up using them to try and rob fellow Ukrainians, and then other Ukrainians shot them. So do you count that? How do you count that person? Obviously, he's not killed by the Russians. Is he? He's a result of the war. But whose side do you blame for that one?
Right.
You blame the Ukrainian government. Say they shouldn't have handed. They also like I think Saddam did, and during they released people from prison, and then literally gave them a gun. So what do you
Right. So that's sort of like when the guy got COVID, and they said, "Well, how you feel?" Not feeling well. He said, "Come on to the hospital." He got in an auto accident. He died on the way. So how do you count that? Was that COVID? Because he died. He wouldn't have been going to the hospital without the COVID. I understand.
Well, here I've the Mail on Sunday in Britain, again, I have to try and find the article. Apparently that they're starting to run a series on that the PCR test, that people who said, there a lot of false positives might be right, and that 1/3 of the PCR test positives were basically false positives.
Mm-hmm.
I have to find the article. But again, if true, then, we've a lot of those significant number of those COVID deaths might not, where again it's like, oh, somebody died with COVID, so we're blaming COVID. That might not be, that if a fair accounting might remove them from the COVID dead. I don't know how many people that would be, but if it's 1/3 that were overestimated, then obviously that's going to be a considerable number that would change how we think of COVID, I mean, that could be like, then if it's true, 1/3 of the existing dead, well, that's, 200 or 300,000 Americans who didn't die.
Yeah, but they took Seinfeld off the air, That's much worse. That was really bad.
Okay, well, let's play maybe one or two more clips. Let me play a short one again.
Really?
I'll tell you about. No.
Our history is marked by indenture, by servitudes, by coming here, being sold, having the shipper make a lot of money since he saved a lot on your food and water and comfort on the ship. And that was quite a profitable trade, just like later the slave trade was profitable. Well, what happened to that system? One of the things that happened, which gave birth to American racism, a long tradition here, is that in 1666 and 1667, there was something called Bacon's Rebellion, where some lesser aristocrats, Lord Bacon for one, were dissatisfied that they got the poorer lands from the Native American lands captured. They wanted more and they weren't given it. They joined and paid for the arms of the indentured servants who were angry, of the freed blacks who were angry and wanted a different kind of government, and for the slaves who rose up in revolt. It was a united revolt of whites and blacks against a class system of ownership and dispossession. So the dispossessed rose up together. And around that time, there were, I want to check and make sure I've got this right, there were 800 rebellions, as well as 6 slave revolts. And those rebellions were united of blacks, free and slave, and indentured servants. They brought in thousands of soldiers from England. Those rebellions were violently put down, and England had a problem on their hands. They didn't want this anymore, and so they instituted racism. They gave whites particular privileges over blacks, which would prevent them from uniting with blacks. They were of higher stature. They got more privileges. When they were freed, they could even own a slave if they could afford one. And so that the balance shifted. And Jim Crow, according to Adolph Reed, who his book about the South, which just came out in this year, in 2022, his last chapter talks about how even the Jim Crow laws were much more beneficial for the ruling class than the ordinary people, who got the distinction of being white, but very little else, and whose labor was cheapened, and who were through that petty bribe prevented from uniting with black workers and winning. And so that's a class lesson for all of us. It's also a history lesson, which is a very important lesson for us to learn, because it shows us that our history has been doctored. It's not only, as the book 1619 and its followers talk about, the horror of slavery and Jim Crow, which has been repressed and continues, that marks our history and has been unspoken. It's also the mass of white Americans' history as bondspeople.
So there's something to think about, again, the history of, white indentured servants in our, which again, that was how a lot of people came to this country, apparently in the first 2 centuries of the 13 colonies.
Reparations.
Well, one thing that could, people point out, well, if one of the reasons Social Security is so liked is because it's given to everybody. It's not.
Well, it's
right. And Dennis, what are your thoughts about? I assume you also believe that there's a connection between capitalism and racism. That capitalism uses racism to divide people and divide the working class, right?
I agree with that. The system in the United States, the racism divide whites and black working class people.
Mm-hmm.
I think capitalism causes constipation too, doesn't it?
Well, no, capitalism tries to, give you a drug for constipation and make money off that. But who knows? Maybe they have some secret way of constipating us so that they can sell us more laxatives or something.
Right.
That's always possible. All right, Ken. So I think we're
going to write goodbye
here. So let's go. So this has been. Let me talk us out. So this has been the Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022 show of Going Viral. Because we gotta. At some point we gotta count how many we've done, Ken. So we know.
Well, I know, it's five. It's five more than we should have done, but that's all.
Probably.
Okay.
But it would be interesting to know when we hit 100 or something.
Okay.
When we probably figure out again 2 a week.
Okay, we're ready to go.
Sure. So yeah.
Okay.
So
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Okay. Bye bye, everybody.